Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast, Renwick Brutus is a great storyteller, even when he's talking about his long battle with sarcoidosis.
I was, as a financial advisor, choosing in that moment to increase my life insurance and to follow the process of sending the application through medical underwriting. And there was a very long delay.
Renwick has an unusual take on his disease.
It's interesting you characterize it as unfortunate, because for a while I did treat it just that way, as unfortunate, but I've come to also see it as fortunate.
Renwick's story is coming up.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello, this is episode 117 of the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast. I am your host, John Carlin. Glad to be with you again today. This episode is brought to you by Atyre Pharmaceuticals. To learn more about their new pulmonary sarcoidosis trial, EFSOFIT, visit stopsarcoidosis.org/Atyre trial. And there'll be a link in the show notes. Of course, I do this podcast, as I tell you, to help you understand what's going on with you, to figure out what the sarcoidosis landscape is, and maybe give you a sense of hope as you deal with this unpredictable disease. And today, we'll be hearing Renwick tell his story and the unusual way he was diagnosed after writing his own insurance policy. It's an interesting story. And my talk with Renwick is coming up in just a few minutes. Man, this is a wonderfully busy time of year. I am just back from some time at a lake house at Smith Mountain Lake here in Southwest Virginia. All 7 grandkids, my 3 sons, their wives, and it was just fantastic. In fact, as I speak, they're still there. But I was scheduled to come back to work, so unfortunately I'm not still there. But we were there for about 5 days, and I taught several of the youngsters how to fish, which is something that, grandfathers are just supposed to do, right? I mean, you're supposed to learn how to fish from Papa, right? And so Papa John was out there on the dock teaching the littles how to fish, and we caught a lot of fish. Right there around the dock, little bluegills and sunfish. And the kids were getting bold. They were playing with the worms, and they learned how to watch the bobber and then to reel in the line. And, just turning the handle to reel in the line was an experience. We're talking about, 3 and 4-year-olds here, okay? And then I've talked earlier in the year about having received a new pedal-powered kayak for Christmas, and so I got it out for the 3rd time at the lake and did a little bit of fishing on my own. I did pretty good, I just want to say, and I really like that kayak. It's living up to expectations, and it is so much easier than paddling. You just turn the pedals like a bicycle, and it turns a propeller under the boat, and you just kind of go along. It's amazingly easy. So really enjoyed that. And then at one point, I had a whole bunch of the grandkids on the kayak, and I was pedaling them around in the little cove near our dock, and that was really adorable. I just loved it. So everything just living up to expectations. And then, you go to the lake, and we are active vacation people. Not a lot of sitting around in our family. And so there's all these lake activities. You're either floating in the lake or jumping off the dock or going out in the boat we were not water skiing, but we've got one of those big rafts that you tow behind the boat, and everybody was getting on that, including the grandkids, along with an adult. And I got to do that and have them just hug me when we went over the waves, and it was just wonderful. But as much as anything, I enjoyed just getting up in the morning and having coffee with everyone around the table, or out. There was a little outdoor patio near the lake, and just sitting there and chatting. And the kids were sort of running around, playing with their toys, and being mostly agreeable. There was some pushing and shoving, as you'll get with children, and a little bit of crying, but it was was very short-lived, and then they moved on to the next thing. So the swimming and the boating and all the lake activities were great, and then just the camaraderie, and we had wonderful meals every night. My daughter-in-law, Emily, and son, Tyler, live on the coast of Virginia, so they brought fresh crab meat and shrimp from the Chesapeake Bay. So we had seafood one night, and then my wife has the most unbelievable rib recipe, so we had ribs one night. And then another night we had buffalo wings that my son Ben prepared, and everybody just brings food, and there was a fair amount of beer. We might have had some bourbon on the rocks, but in the evening around the campfire, it was all just kind of Norman Rockwell-esque. So good time there. But as I speak this morning, I'm in the midst of packing for an 8-day bicycle adventure, riding my bike all the way across New York State on the Empire Trail from Buffalo to Albany. That's 400 miles. Basically, you're following the old Erie Canal. And if that kind of sounds familiar to you, if you've been listening to the podcast, it's because it is part of the same path that fellow Sark fighter Royce Robertson has talked about here on the podcast as part of his fundraiser for FSR, and he is doing that in segments across last summer and then this summer. And he and I have not been able to coordinate our schedules to ride together as a fundraiser. And I want to make this very clear. My ride is purely vacation time, but Royce is doubling down on his Cycle for Sark activities, and he'll be riding a different part of this course coming up in August. And I've been in touch with him, and things are going pretty well for him. He's done part of his ride already this summer. Then later in August, he goes back and he resumes, and he will be joining me on the podcast to talk more about that and talk about the fundraising. And, for Royce, this is, he's had a tough battle with sarcoidosis. And so for him to get on his bike and do what he's doing is incredible. And I hope that he might be able to meet up with us somewhere along this trail, because he lives not too far from Syracuse, New York, and the trail does go through Syracuse. So hopefully I'll be meeting up with him if the planets align perfectly. And so I'll let you know and stay tuned. But I do encourage you in the meantime to donate to Royce's efforts, and there is a link in the show notes. Meanwhile, I'm a bit intimidated by this endeavor. I just have to say that, my sarcoidosis is not nothing. I would say that I am very well controlled right now. I don't want to call it outright remission because I'm still taking Humira and everything, but I am able to ride. But this will be the most riding I have ever done in my entire life, back to back to back. So 400 miles over 8 days, riding essentially 40 to 60 miles a day, depending upon where they have set up the stops and starts. And I'm doing this with, 300 to 500 other people. So it's kind of like a rolling party along the Erie Canal. But we do camp at night in tents. But we have paid for a service that sets up our tent and blows up our air mattress. Somebody tried to call this glamping. To me, glamping is a much bigger tent and like with bedside tables and that kind of thing and electricity. This won't be that, but there is a little village, and they're going to set up showers for us. And so, but you're there with all these other cyclists, and I've really never done anything like this. So sleeping in a tent for the first time in a couple of decades, that's going to be interesting. The daily mileage doesn't sound undoable, but I will tell you that it does sound intimidating. And then not to get a good night's sleep after that, but the compounding the fact that you'll be camping. I do worry a little bit about, may sound gross to you, but saddle sores. If you sit on the bike for a long time, day after day after day, your butt can get some sore spots. I'm just going to say that I'm concerned. Do what we can to avoid that. Then there's the weather, right? I mean, if it rains or whatever it is, I've got a raincoat and all the foul weather gear, but you got to seek shelter if there's thunderstorms, and those are likely in July in central New York. And so, I'm kind of, right now sitting here thinking about, well, what if, what if, what if? And then there's a coordination of getting all my stuff into 3 bags. You got to carry your sleeping bag. You got to have your everything you need in your tent, your HBAs, your toothbrush and razor and whatever else. And there's just a lot to coordinate. All right, and so yes, I'm intimidated, and right now I'm thinking I probably need to be off doing that, but I wanted to get this podcast ready to go before I left. So here we are. I also want to let you know that in the next episode, I'll be talking again with Mark Steyer. Mark, if that name sounds familiar, and I hope it does, he's the man who wrote and sings the title song to the podcast called Zombie. And Mark has had some setbacks with his sarcoidosis, and he's going to talk about that. And he did. I've already done the interview, but I'm not going to release it until the next episode. But then in the meantime, his wife has stepped up to begin some serious fundraising for FSR, and she has been granted one of FSR's spots in the New York City Marathon this fall, and she will be doing some training and, of course, fundraising this summer so that she can go out and do the 26.2-mile New York City Marathon in the fall. And they both joined me for the interview, and plans are again for the next episode to feature their story. I hope you are enjoying this podcast. Please help me make this more effective and reach more people so FSR can be as effective as possible. And it just really helps grow the show if you share it on your social media. Tell somebody else in the sarcoidosis space, hey, have you listened to the FSR Sarcfighter podcast? That's the voice of sarcoidosis. And if you're trying to figure out what's going on with sarcoidosis, and you go on the forums and people are all over the place, and you don't know whether to be scared or what the real deal is, if you just kind of want to hear it directly from the people who have it and are involved, and you can take a measure of them by listening to their whole story and listen to it in their own voice, or listening to the researchers or listening to the folks at FSR, you'll get a much better idea of the landscape in which we all live with sarcoidosis. And so that's what the podcast is all about. And if you would share that message kind of that way with people, get more people listening to the show, it'll just help make FSR that much more effective. All right. Speaking of all that, coming up, Renwick Brutus shares his sarcoidosis story.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarcfighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarcfighter podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarcfighter podcast. Joining me now is Renwick Brutus. Renwick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you find yourself in the unfortunate position of being a fellow Sarcfighter. Tell us about your sarcoidosis.
Yeah, it's interesting you characterize it as unfortunate, because for a while I did treat it just that way, as unfortunate, but I've come to also see it as fortunate. And why I say that is because it has been an interesting journey of discovery of myself, but of healthcare, and of opportunities to just go with the flow that sometimes life channels us toward. For me, the journey through sarcoidosis became most evident when I went to increase my life insurance 2 years after I'd purchased some. And what was interesting about it is that I was both the agent and the applicant. In other words, I was as a financial advisor, choosing in that moment to increase my life insurance and to follow the process of sending the application through medical underwriting. And there was a very long delay, which was unusual
Hmm.
in my experience. And as I inquired, what I learned from the medical underwriting department was that they had found some irregularities. And of course, my antennas went up and I was pushing them to tell me what it was. And they said, well, we can't discuss this with you yet, but give us some time. And so a week later, they came back with a decision that it was denied.
Huh.
It was the first time that I had written a policy on a client and have it denied. And it just happened to be me, the applicant, who was being denied. And so that precipitated a lot of questions. I got the report. I sent it to a family member, my sister-in-law, who was a medical professional. And the encouragement was to go consult with my doctor, which I did. And that started what was an 8-month-long journey through all types of tests, all kinds of biopsies, lots of anxiety, as you might imagine. And with one gastroenterologist in 1993 saying, finally, that there was nothing conclusive. All he could suggest was that based on some of the lab results, there are two things that came to mind. And he mentioned the first and then the second as sarcoidosis. This, he said, rare disease that affected people of primarily African and Scandinavian descent, and generally when they were between ages 30 and 40. And at the time, there I was of African descent, age 32, right smack dab in the middle of that range. And but he said, I have nothing conclusive, but this is all I can think it is. So I took that diagnosis for what it was, and nothing was done because it wasn't conclusive. And 5 years later, after I'd moved out of state from New Jersey to Michigan, just following up with gastroenterologists, my primary care physician, and so forth. And I had this this lesion on my skin that itched, and it would itch when I took my clothes off.
Hmm.
And so I said to my primary care physician what was going on, and she prescribed some ointments. And after about 6 months, I said, I want to have a visit with a dermatologist. Would you refer me? She did. Saw the dermatologist, and he said, oh, these look like oil ducts, oil glands, and treated me with some tetracycline. And I used those for about 2 months and went back to him and said, it wasn't really making a difference. He increased the dose, the strength, and had me go back for another on a plan for another 2 or 3 months, and that didn't produce any improvement. So I said to my primary care physician, I want to go see another dermatologist. I'm not impressed. I'm not convinced, right? And so I went to this other dermatologist, and he asked if it was okay for him to do a biopsy, and I said sure. And so on Christmas Eve day, 1998. I went back to this dermatologist for the results of the biopsy. And he said to me, I have good news and I have bad news.
Huh.
And he said, the good news is this is not cancer, like you've expressed a concern in. It's not cancer. These are sarcoids. And I looked at him, I said, sarcoids, as in sarcoidosis? And he said, yeah, what do you know about sarcoidosis? I said, well, 5 years ago, and I told him the story about being denied for insurance and going through these tests, and this doctor, this gastroenterologist, suggesting it could be sarcoidosis. He said, yeah, that's what this is. Sarcoidosis is showing up 5 years later in a very concrete way. So that's when I was introduced, and he did something that I'm forever grateful for. And that is he prescribed prednisone, but he also gave me a book, Coping with Prednisone,
Oh, wow.
that was written by a doctor and her sister who had occasion to be on prednisone. And together they came by to document the
Wow.
experience
I did
with
not know
prednisone.
there was such a book because almost every person who's come on this show, we've had that conversation about prednisone, and I've experienced it myself. Okay. All right. So he gave you the book.
And I read the book, and I was prepared somewhat, certainly not fully, but somewhat to what I was likely to experience. And that saved a lot of relationships. I destroyed a lot of relationships while on prednisone because I was on very high doses. I mean, I was at one time on 80 milligrams for an extended period of time. And I put on a lot of weight. I was very agitated. I was running a business. I had a staff. I'm small business. I was very irritable. I had a
Yeah.
short
Yeah.
fuse.
I did 80 milligrams as well. And so you're one of the few people that I've talked to that was at that threshold. So, and same result, boy, it was hard. It's hard to be around somebody on 80 grams of prednisone. So, did anybody quit, or did you insult anybody, or did you have to go to your own HR department?
Well, all of that, I blew up relationships with employees, with partners. I Yeah, I had an office manager who was with me for 13 years. She's a was a blessing because she stayed true all of it as a stable force, and in fact deflected a lot of the animosity I otherwise would have provoked without question. Yeah, so and I wasn't nearly as productive, certainly not as effective. My attention span was shot. It was difficult to focus, to execute. There it was, I was in my own business. In fact, I had a couple of businesses at the time. And as we would say, it's only by the grace of God that I managed to come through on the other side intact, but certainly bruised and scarred, and with lots of wreckage in terms of relationships along the
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
And it certainly was a period of time that caused me to recalibrate, um, reassess the fit between my life with prednisone and what I had aspired to
Right.
prior to it.
Right.
You know,
So
it
how
yeah.
no, how long did it take you to get off of the prednisone? Because usually they'll dose you down maybe 10 milligrams a month or something like that. So you go 80, 70, 60, which still, you're still not a nice person at 60, 50, 40. Did it take the better part of a year to dose it down once they
Yeah,
decided that they could do that?
I was on prednisone for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And that was the first bout. That was the cutaneous sarcoidosis,
Okay.
1998. And then subsequently it showed up in my colon and in my sinuses. I had 2 sinus surgeries. After the second, lost my sense of smell. And that occurred back in about 2009, 2008 or 9.
Man,
And
I've not
then,
heard of sinus.
oh yeah,
Wow.
oh yeah, yeah,
Wow.
colon, sinus. And then in 2000. later in 2009, and this is an interesting story. When I veg out, I like to look at soccer. And so one Sunday afternoon, I was looking at soccer and took a break, blew my nose because my sinuses were congested, and I felt this sharp prick in my head. And I thought, that's weird. It was like a needle, just a needle prick. And I've never experienced anything like that. So I came back down and was looking at soccer and realized that all of a sudden it was blurred. And so I cleaned my glasses and it continued to be blurred. And I continued to do that for the next 3 days. And then finally on Wednesday, it occurred to me, hold a second here, Renwick. You've been cleaning your glasses and it hasn't helped. And maybe it's not your glasses, pal. And so I took my glasses off and did a self-test, and lo and behold, I had blurred vision in one eye.
Mm.
And so the next day, that was a Thursday, I went straight to my ophthalmologist's office, shared what had happened. They did a few tests, didn't see anything abnormal, and suggested I have my primary care physician write a referral for me to have a CAT scan. And lo and behold, that's what I did. Drove over to the local radiology department, did a scan, and at about 6 o'clock that evening, the radiologist said, we've got some irregularities. And so I said innocently, can you share with me what you're seeing? He said, no, I can't discuss this with you.
Yeah,
You can
they
have to
never
talk
do,
to your
right?
doctor.
Yeah.
So I said, Kimball, maybe I can reach my doctor's office. Called the doctor's office, and the on-call guy was there. And he said to me, you're not my patient. I can't discuss this with you. I said, but hold a second, you're in the same office. He says, yes, we're in the same office, but you are not my patient, so I cannot discuss these results with you. It's one of two things. Either you come in tomorrow morning when your doctor is in, which would be Friday morning, or if you're concerned enough, check yourself into the ER, which is what I chose to do.
Really? Okay. Huh.
And yeah, because I wanted to attack this issue. And so at about midnight, a little before midnight, I got admitted. And at about 2:15, 2:30, that what would be Friday morning, I found myself talking to a neurosurgeon.
Neurosurgeon. Okay.
Who shared with me the findings. They had seen this little mass on the lining of my brain, the dura. And so we talked about it. Of course, I asked, so what does this mean? He said, well, it's a tumor. And so how do you address this? Well, we do a surgical removal. I said, so tell me about this process. Right? Well, he describes how they would, drill, cut a hole in your skull, and then go in. And so what are the risks? Well, yeah, there's a risk of nerve damage and those types of things. And John, this is one of those moments in time when I recognize that intellect takes us only so far. Intelligence takes us only so far. We can take credit for only so much, because the next several minutes I'll never be able to rationally explain. All I could tell you is that I proceeded to ask this neurosurgeon why he chose to pursue not only neurosurgery, which I consider to be at the pinnacle of the medical practice, but these subspecialties. And he, as he answered, he took his time and he explained my questions. But as he was explaining and answering, my mind was racing through my life for an escape. I didn't realize it at the time, but I literally scanned all that was going on in my life and was fortunate enough to recall that in the preceding 5 years, I had had 2 sinus surgeries. And on both occasions, they had found sarcoids in my sinuses.
Yeah.
And so when that stuck in my head, I looked at him and I said, hold a second. I actually interrupted him mid-sentence. I said, hold a second. I said, in the last 5 years, I've had 2 sinus surgeries. They've found sarcoids in my sinuses. What are the odds that this mass that you've seen on this film is a sarcoid and not a tumor? And he looked at me stunned and said to me, he said, do you have sarcoidosis? And I looked at him and I said, yes, I do. And actually, it's in my chart.
Yeah, he hadn't looked.
And he was like a ghost. I mean, he backed up. He said, he froze. He said, I'll be back. Give me about 20 minutes. And he left my bed and he went to his desk and he came back about half hour later. And he said, you know what? We're going to do a second set of scans. We're going to do some 3D scans and see how those appear. So that next morning, which was a Saturday morning, they took me down in the gurney, did a set of scans. And later that Saturday evening, when he did his rounds, he said, looking at the scans a second time, the radiologist said they present more like sarcoids than tumors.
Really?
And so what we'll do, he said, we'll treat you for sarcoidosis.
Okay.
That's how close it was. He'd already had that. When I was talking to him at 2:30 that Friday morning, he'd already had the surgical suite reserved for brain surgery.
Mm.
Right. So the lesson, and so I said fortunately earlier rather than just unfortunately, because what I've done in the years since is, number one, become much more assertive, a much greater advocate for myself, but I've also shared that, woven that into my conversations with friends and family and clients to say, sometimes all you have is a nanosecond to speak up. Because if you don't, all is lost forever. Sometimes.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, who knows what would have happened had they opened you up and done quote unquote open brain surgery. I mean, I know full well what happens with neurosurgeons. But you know, if you have a guy who's really good with a hammer and you go see him, the answer is use the hammer. And if you know, depending upon which doctor you're talking to, he's just inclined to use his specialty to solve the problem. And I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just an observation. It's just human nature.
Right.
So Renwick, I'm curious, what do you do with these? Do you sell insurance? Are you a financial advisor? All of the above. You mentioned you have several businesses, so you got a lot going on while you're dealing with all of this sarcoidosis.
Yeah, and I've modified my trust. I got rid of one of the businesses that was involved in decontamination, improving indoor air quality. That was quite demanding, quite stressful. Great need in the marketplace. We did some great work going way back to the aftermath of Katrina down in New Orleans. I'd mobilized a team. We'd done a lot of really great work to get people back in their homes.
So like mold reduction, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I had that business, got rid of it, and pull back to concentrate on my two primary areas of focus, which have for decades been in two areas. One is financial advice, helping people take hold of their financial health and well-being. And the second is in the area of improving performance and results at a level of individuals, professionals, managers, owners of companies, leaders, to help them excel in their careers, be more effective at whatever it
Mhm.
is they're
So
trying to do.
personal coaching at an executive level, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
that'd be
Yep.
correct. Yeah.
Yep.
So and because of the treatments and the rigor with which I have had to attend to obtaining medical advice, treatment, infusions, and so forth, I've just pared that back considerably. Um, prior to the sarcoidosis diagnosis and the neurosarcoidosis and the infusions and the effects of all those drugs on me, and on the other hand, the need to reduce stress and be more available to exercise and rest and be properly nourished and have treatments. Considering all of that, I dramatically curtailed growth, and it's now just done at the level of being more selective and mindful of who most benefits, how does that get leveraged for greatest effectiveness by those who are clients, but also so that I could have a lot of fun and enjoyment without burning myself out.
That's that kind of self-awareness is rare. That you can dial it back and you can dial it back effectively without feeling that longing for wherever you were prior or wherever your trajectory had been taking you.
Wow, you said it beautifully, and you're absolutely right. And it hasn't come easily. It continues to be a fight. It's is that, and especially by virtue of having worked in that realm of unlocking potential, utilizing untapped potential. One of the foundational questions is always, how are you doing relative to the use of your potential?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And
Yes.
and and the answer is usually, well, there's a gap. And so even as I wrestle with and have wrestled with curtailing how much I do, there's also the irony of recognizing that I I have untapped potential myself. Uh, how do I do better? Not do more, but do better with the minutes. Get done in minutes what ordinarily might have taken hours. Right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I
Mm-hmm.
get better with identifying the path of greatest effectiveness? And maybe instead of working with 5 leaders, maybe work with that one. I mean, it's is that perpetual recalibration of
Uh,
where am I most effective and best utilized and on purpose.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just gonna throw this at you because you're 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 working for yourself, but there's that old adage that the doctor who treats himself has a fool for a patient. Have you heard that?
Yes,
So, but maybe do you talk to others in your space and say, help me talk through this so that I'm not building on my own assumptions?
absolutely. Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yes. In fact, one of my very best friends is a psychologist who works in the field of
Okay.
helping people find themselves and improve performance and so forth too. So, in fact, within the last 3 months, not only have we been on the phone on Zoom calls and telephone calls, but he's actually visited me a couple of times. In fact, I'm going to see him. We're going to get together tomorrow. I'm flying up to Grand Rapids and we're going to have some good time, part of which is preparing a presentation we're going to be doing for an international association of psychologists and counselors.
Nice.
But to answer your question, and that's a great point, John. Yes, I am fortunate in that on a weekly basis, I'm in touch with colleagues and peers who have the who have my well-being at heart, who truly care about me, and who have the perspectives to truly help. And I'm very thankful for that.
That's amazing. So you are leaving shortly today after our conversation to go have a Remicade treatment, right? So
Yes.
uh, what is going on with your sarcoidosis right now here in June of 2024?
Yeah, it's stable. The last 4 years of MRIs, which I've done in November, have shown slight reductions or decreases in the size of the sarcoid that's on the lining of my brain, the dura.
Yeah.
And according to the neurologist whom I see, to the point of it being almost imperceptible.
And your vision has returned?
Yes, that's been fine. That's been stable. No issues there.
Great.
So I have a great report. Things are stable. There are no other sites that have surfaced with sarcoidosis.
No side effects from the Remicade?
No, if I laugh with that one because over the years I've been on so many meds.
Right. Right.
It's hard to know what's normal from what's not anymore.
Right. Did you do methotrexate for a time? Yeah.
Yes, you know it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hydroxychloroquine
Yeah.
or Plaquenil.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been on methotrexate going back to I only got off of methotrexate last year and I was on it with a little break, maybe a couple of times since 2009 or 10.
Okay.
So I was in it for a long time.
Yeah.
Along with Plaquenil.
Right. And so, but now you have found FSR and you are volunteering with FSR.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. In fact, FSR, my after the neurosarc diagnosis and being treated for 5 or 6 years, I, in doing some research, found FSR and that they were doing a joint project, a workshop, a 2-day workshop with Cleveland Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2017, I believe.
Okay.
2017 or 2018, I think it was 17. And I decided to drive over from Grand Rapids, Michigan to Cleveland and attend that workshop. And it was then that I realized that what they had was so collaborative in real time that it would offer me the best possible treatment for my sarcoidosis. Because up until then, I was seeing an individual who was familiar with sarcoidosis, but his background was strictly pulmonology. And he wasn't in a center such as Cleveland has, which allows for real-time or almost real-time discussion, sharing about the best practices, but also about the patient. And so I walked away from that workshop with a decision that I was going to transfer my care to Cleveland, which is what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go there and spend a night or two and see everybody from the different specialties, the ophthalmologists, the pulmonologists, the neurologists, and so forth.
On the ninth floor.
You know it.
I know it. I know it.
So I did that, and then when I moved down to Florida, I got the transfer. But that's where my relationship with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research started. And over the years, I've stayed in touch. I've attended their conferences and so forth. And when the opportunity surfaced, in fact, so I moved on to Florida, and as is so typical, I build relationships and with the clinic staff, and I have fun. I'm not, fortunately, in such bad shape that I'm a miserable patient.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be a positive, upbeat, jovial person. I interact and I bring some levity to even the clinic, and I know that they appreciate it too. And by virtue of that relationship, no doubt they felt good enough about me and my interests to suggest to FSR that they reach out to me for the potential that I might somehow volunteer with FSR. And so that's how that started. They suggested that FSR reach out to me. FSR did. I said, yes, I'll help in any way I can. And so, yeah, I'm a group leader, community group leader within the Tampa branch of TGH,
The
Tampa General
hospital there.
Hospital.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't it make you feel good to help other people who don't know what they're up against or just need someone to talk to? I mean, isn't it the most uplifting thing in the world?
It is, John, and you say it that way, but that's going back to early in my career, in my 20s. That's one of the things I recognized in myself that I enjoyed doing that caused me to choose my career path. I just enjoyed being a conduit
Yes.
of information, of relationships, of resources for the purpose of helping people that I meet. And this certainly allows me to do just that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Renwick, so you're feeling pretty good. I wanted to ask you, see, you're wearing a soccer, looks like an Adidas top or something like that, and you mentioned you like to watch soccer. Were you particularly athletic at any point in your life prior to or after your diagnosis?
Yes, I was quite athletic. I played a lot of table tennis, and
Okay.
I I have smiles on my face naturally
Uh-huh.
when I think of the many years of table tennis competition.
Huh.
And I played a lot of cricket as well.
Cricket.
Coming from Guyana, South America, the West Indies. I had a team that played a lot of Test cricket and competed with Australia, New Zealand, India, Pakistan, and more recently, since the dissolution of apartheid, South Africa. But yeah, so I grew up playing a lot of cricket, and and table tennis, and did odd end things if
So, but
something
you were
happened.
playing like not just club cricket. You were playing at a very high level if you're traveling like that to play.
No, 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 I didn't. I didn't play at that high level. No,
Oh,
I had,
okay. Okay.
and I never really had dreams because I never really saw myself with that amount of talent
Okay.
in
Okay.
in cricket. But I was a fan of it. But I did play at college level.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
played high school. I did tour with my high school team, to Barbados, and I did play at college level and club level locally. Um, so built a lot of friendships there, and even in fact, later this year in December, my brother and I are taking a trip to Australia and New Zealand, and to see. And one of the things we'll do is, and the primary focus of the trip is to look at Test cricket between Australia and Pakistan. But
Uh-huh.
then we're also going to head over to New Zealand, where a high school friend of ours who played Test cricket lives. So we're going
Mm-hmm.
to reconnect with him after quite a few decades. We've still
Wow.
been in touch. We've still been in touch, but not in person. So that's going to be
Wow.
fun.
Wow. Well, that's it. The reason I ask is it seems like an amazing number of people who have found this podcast uh, have been highly athletic in their lives. Um, and talent, it's not like you have to play in major league. I was never going to win a marathon, but I was a marathoner, and
Right.
I would push my body to its extreme. I was trying to use, like you mentioned, how much potential is there. I was trying to find every ounce of whatever potential there was and leave it on the line. I was determined to do that. But it's just an amazing number of people with sarcoidosis, uh, coincidentally, have had no causality here, just um, have been athletes, and I'm not convinced that there's not some kind of connection.
Yeah, there probably is, and of course we continue to wonder because of the lived experience,
Hmm.
and I've retraced my steps in many respects. Where have I been? Where have I worked? What places have I ventured into? To see if maybe there's some way I could connect the where I was with what might have triggered the onset of the inflammation, right?
Hmm.
And I well, the research suggests it's there are multiple factors that could cause, and sometimes it seems combined to cause it to flare up. Environmental being one. I've had allergies to environmental factors ever since I was a child. Um, I was more sensitive than my siblings and other family members. So but I never withdrew altogether from the contaminants,
Right.
airborne, environmental. And so who knows if that played a part. And certainly for as much time as I spent outside running, playing cricket, all those types of things, who knows how much more I might have ingested
Right.
of those triggers.
Right. Well, maybe someday we will know what it is that causes all of us to be in this predicament. But I really appreciate your outlook, and I must say you're one of the easiest people to meet that I have ever met.
Well, thank you.
You're very charismatic, and I can see where you would be effective in a group setting, helping people try to understand and deal with their sarcoidosis. So,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, John. I appreciate the feedback, and I certainly appreciate your bringing your talent to help us have a voice, have an audience, share as best we could to hopefully improve the lives of a few people out there.
yeah.
So thank you for that.
All right. And thank you, Rennick. I appreciate you joining me.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Thanks to Renwick for sharing his story. Man, isn't he a good storyteller? He starts off on a journey and you just sit back and listen. He's just one of these people that has a knack for it. I could see where he would be good in sales. I enjoyed hearing about how he bought that Porsche, as much as his backstory about writing his own insurance policy and then having it rejected and then having that lead to his diagnosis, at least the first time. And then can you imagine a doctor wanting to do brain surgery only to discover it was sarcoidosis because Renwick alerted him at the last minute and said, hey, before we do all that, I have sarcoidosis, right? It's in my chart. And the doctor goes back and looks and then, so that was a lot to unpack. So thanks to Renwick for volunteering for FSR and for joining me today and sharing his story. And you know what? The official Sarkfighter song is called Zombie by Mark Steyer, who plays with a band called the White Hot Lizards in Canada. You can hear Mark's story, the story behind the lyrics, back in episode 12. Normally, I release every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, my trusty dog Dougal is not curled up on the chair in my office, although he was, but my wife Mary is home today, and she's busy doing things that he thinks are more interesting, so Dougal's following her around the house, and I don't have my trusty companion. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Don't forget to follow the Sarkfighter or FSR Sarkfighter on Facebook and Instagram. I'm even on Peloton as Sarkfighter. And my cycling blog, Carl and the Cyclist, has a newly updated blog under the Cycling with Sarcoidosis section. So if you go look, I talk a little bit about all my most recent endeavors and how I'm dealing with sarcoidosis at the same time. And of course, when I get back from this big trip across New York State, there will be a big blog entry there as well. And I probably will do some vlogging, like video blogging along the way as well. So you're going to get a solid dose of my cycling adventure here in the summer of 2024. Thank you so much for listening. My story is back in episode 1. Episode 2 is Dr. Simon Hart, who goes over everything there is to know about sarcoidosis. I call it Sarcoidosis 101. If you want to contact me, send me an email, carlinagency@gmail.com. There's a link in the show notes, and I always like to hear from you. If you want to be on the show, if you have a comment, just let me know. All right, have a great summer, and until next time, keep fighting.